Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Alex Williamson here with The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. Today we're going to be talking about my favorite biotope, and that is Lake Inle, which is in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. And we're going to start out by looking at the biotope tank that I've set up and looking at some of the common fish that you might like that are in the trade readily available. And then we'll switch to talking about what makes the lake so special evolutionarily, culturally, and geography, and some of the weird quirks about why there are so many nano fish in that lake. And one other thing that I want to see if you guys notice too, which has to do with what almost all the fish in the lake look like. So I'm going to give you a sneak peek right now, and then we're going to look at the tank, and then we'll loop back around to all of this. Get ready, guys. We're going to talk about my favorite biotope, which is really 3 different biotopes in one. So, see you inside. Alright, guys, so before we jump into talking about the culture and geography of the lake, I wanted to show you my biotope so you guys could get some ideas of, something you could do in your own aquarium easily. And this is a 26-gallon long aquarium, kind of a unique size, but it's something that you could easily do in your own house, and these are all fairly common fish that are in the hobby right now that you can get a hold of easily. And you can see that I've got celestial pearl danios, which are just a beautiful little fish found south of the lake. About 20 kilometers is where they were first collected, but there are reports that they're in the streams that feed right into the lake within, just a mile of the lake or less. They like running streams in clear water, it sounds like, a little bit more, with kind of neutral pH, neutral TDS, and by that I mean just fairly middle of the road, maybe 200 or 300 TDS max, and as low as 50 or 100 on a rainy day during the wet season. So they have a pretty wide range that they're comfy with, and that's actually true of a lot of these fish. So we also have the beautiful thick-lipped gourami, and these ones are from the south end of the lake. They're silver across most of the lake and the swamps that surround the lake. You got a swamp on the north end of the lake where a lot of things trickle out of the mountains. There's no river feeding into the actual lake, which is really interesting, but there is a bit of an outflow that trickles down through swamps and can become a river during the rainy season, and then connects to a big old reservoir that's man-made. But historically, there really was no river in or out for the last 400,000 plus years, maybe even as long as 650,000. Geologists aren't exactly sure. And the plants you're seeing are also pretty similar to what you'd see in the marshy part of the lake. And you'll also find some amazing people living on the lake that have turned the entire lake for the last 2,000 years into a garden. And so what they do is they take the reeds from the coastal shallows on the lake and they cut them down and float them in a big old woven mat, and then they fill in plant material and compost from their own daily lives until it actually becomes this big floating bog type thing, and that's where they plant their crops with the roots in the water. So here we have one of the most fascinating fish in the lake that's also in the hobby, pretty easy to find in a lot of places, and that is the red-tailed Lake Inle loach. Here we have a male, and the males and females have a red tail, but the males have this line down the side. And if you've noticed, it has a crooked little bend in its body, in its spine. And that's not just my fish. That's every single male in the species has actually acquired that. And in the lake, they've been able to live completely at harmony with the other fish and survive and thrive, get around with that genetic defect. It's just not been detrimental, and if anything, maybe there's a reason for it. So it's kind of interesting. Now, what we're also seeing here are some little loaches. I know they look kind of similar, but these are Rosy Loaches, sometimes called red Lake Inle loaches, without the red tail part. And the females are pretty active midwater swimmers. They like to eat algae. They like to eat a little bit of everything. But the males are a bright red to champagne color, depending on the time of day. And when they're just kind of hanging out, they're a lighter color. But like right now, when feeding, they get pretty darn bright. When spawning, they get almost, ruby red, like bright red. Now, the other fish that's in here that's not a native, but looks pretty similar to a lot of native fish, and you guys, I'll show you some pictures of more native fish and you'll see what I mean. This Siamese algae eater, it's a reticulatus Siamese algae eater, specifically that's the species, and he's just eating algae off the glass right now. He's in here because it's a newer tank, but they're not from the region. They're from about 500 miles north east. Now, again, the other fish that I didn't mention yet is the danio chopra, or chopra danio, which is a really cool fish, also goes by glow light danio, and they're just a rainbow of color compared to most danios. They have yellow, purple, orange, and silver and white all throughout them. They kind of come off as this peach or orange color with a yellow belly, and they're a very active mid to top water swimmer. So they're a lot of fun and really cool, and altogether I think it makes for a pretty nice looking tank, if I don't say so myself. So what you want to have is fairly stable conditions for them. Now in the lake, they're not that stable of conditions. In the north part of the lake, the pH can be as high as 9.2, whereas the south part, it can be as low as 5.5 in the boggy areas where people have transformed it into gardens where they grow plants and they toss their veggies and any wood or plant material that they're using from nearby areas is kind of just floating. They use the lake as kind of a refuse bin for organic materials, and it eventually breaks down, but in the meantime it adds to the tannins and the other compounds of botanicals breaking down in the lake. So you get this very tannic, almost similar to black water, but the water it starts with in the lake is a very clear water that's been there for quite some time, that's all kind of rain fed. Now here we have a female loach coming in, of the red-tailed loach. She's much bigger than the males, and she still kind of has a little bend to her, but she's coming in now to see what's going on. And they're definitely benthic or bottom feeders, but they will swim up and kind of swim around, very similar to pandagaras or other fish that you've kept before, possibly like the pandagara or the rufa, or they're kind of similar to any playful little loach you've had. So these are all fairly small fish that you're able to keep in a fairly small tank. The gouramis will stay at this 2.5 inch size. So the glow light danios will stay within 1.5 to 2 inches very max. Some of them only get 1 inch long. It just kind of depends on the line and how they're fed and the space they have. And I don't have them now, but I really wish I did. There are another species of danio that are very common in the lake. There for size, you can see the Inle loach, the red-tailed Inle loach. She's pretty big. The females are a good 3.5 to 4 inches max. She's about 2 years old. I've had her in my other tanks for a while. So they can get pretty good size, but they're still a really beautiful fish. And every fish on the lake is very limited in their barbel length. So even though you see this one has some pretty good sized barbels, that's about the biggest ratio you're going to see. There's no catfish native to the lake other than the walking catfish, which is pretty suspect because it can get out and go several kilometers, a mile and a half on land, no problem. So it's pretty suspect that it may have been brought in. Plus it's eaten as food in the region as well. So it's probably from an adjacent valley. But it's kind of different than most of your normal catfish, but nothing that is in the lake and endemic. There's no catfish species, so it's very odd. That's one of the mysteries. Now, another mystery that I'm going to mention now and give you my thoughts on the answer to the riddle is, why does every fish in the lake, out of the 58 species found there, have reds or pinks, yellow, red, orange, pink, those colors in them? Those are not the most common colors to have in a fish, yet almost every species out of the 58 that are found there, and that's some that aren't even native, some that are introduced, like guppies and things, tend to be brighter red. So what gives? What's the deal? So we'll talk about that when we get into geology and more stuff. In the meantime, I want to show you up close another kind of biotope that you could do, which is, this is where I hatch out my CPDs, celestial pearl danios, and I also have a bunch of shrimp from Southeast Asia in here, just wild ones. They're not found in the same region, and unfortunately there really aren't that many shrimp in the lakes. There's some prawns, and there's a crab species and some snails, but other than that, there aren't a whole lot of dwarf shrimp or shrimp that we'd think of from the hobby type critters in the lake, inverts. That being said, there are a ton of other little critters in the lake when it comes down to scuds and bugs and different terrestrial life forms that come right to the water's edge. So there is a lot of protein for the fish to eat in the ecosystem. But this is where I raise the CPDs. The moss is not exactly characteristic of the lake. Moss is reported in spots on the lake, but this would be more similar to the type of foliage, not necessarily the species, but the type that you'd see in the parts where the humans are, right on the a foot from the shore, that kind of thing, with a stick and with large rounded rocks that are smooth underneath. That allows for the celestial pearl danios that are in here to just naturally lay their eggs, which they do very frequently. You can watch my video on celestial pearl danio breeding and spawning if you're more curious about that. But let me show you one more species in the lake firsthand before we talk about the ecology and some of the interesting history and trivia as well as geology of the lake. So here we have another one of my favorite species of fish that is only found in the Lake Inle region, in the lake itself and the swamps around it, and that is the beautiful, sometimes it's called the emerald dwarf rasbora, but that name is less common now, and it just goes by erythromicron pretty commonly now, which is its Latin name, which basically just means red and small. Which is a pretty apt name. It's got kind of red and orange on its fins, and you can see here's a celestial pearl danio in with them. These guys are in a bit of quarantine. They're just being treated because I got them just at kind of a bigger pet store, and I wanted to treat them first. So they're in a nano tank with some other little nano fish that are all kind of being treated right now. Because what is very common in this species, the erythromicron, which has the big dot on its tail, and the celestial pearl danios, is they've been very inbred in the hobby, and you'll see some of them have a kind of hump on the head, which is normal with age generally, but then the spine starts to kind of curve also, and that's not a healthy sign. That is an unhealthy sign. And the sunken belly is also pretty prominent there. That one is kind of starting to show it, and if we look elsewhere, I might be able to show you guys one that is showing it even more so. Now, these little chili rasboras are not found in the lake, but there is a species that's extremely similar. It would basically be what these guys look like without the black on them, and that is the little neon red rasbora, which used to be sold under the name the rasbora, the axelrodi, neon red, and there's a neon blue and a neon green. There's one with a sunken belly. That's why I'm treating him. That's due to genetics and being in big ponds in Southeast Asia where they can get parasites or malnourished. So don't know which one it is, but we're treating it for parasites and bacterial infection, and then feeding it good live, or not necessarily live, but frozen or live food to get its nutrient level back up. But as I was saying, these little red guys, they're very similar all throughout Southeast Asia, from Borneo and the islands down the Malay Peninsula and into Papua New Guinea region, all the way up through Thailand and into Vietnam. You'll find these little teeny Rasbora species, and they're very cool. So let's talk about the history of the lake, geographics, the people, and what shapes the evolution of these fish, because that's all fascinating. And why is it that we only discovered celestial pearl danios, erythromicrons, all these cool fish? Why is it that we only discovered them in 2006, the Western world, that is? So let's go talk about that now and finish this off. Alright guys, so let's acquaint ourselves first with where Myanmar is. So this is the country, formerly Burma. Here's India. Up here, obviously, China with all the giant cities. Then you've got Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Bangladesh over here. And we're going to be zooming in right in here to the center of the country. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to be looking at this area right in here, and this is the man-made flooded marsh area I was discussing earlier, but right above it is Lake Inle, or Inle Lake as it's often called by colonial English. So when you look at the region, you can see that it's surrounded by mountains, and it's kind of a shallow river valley that basically got cut off. And during the Ice Age, they believe, or sometime before, there was either a landslide or it could have been just from tectonic plate movement, but at some point things got cut off. So there used to be inflow into this area once upon a time, probably over in this area, they believe, and then there was an outflow to the river down this way. Well, the river got dammed, silt built up here, and the whole lake is only about 12 feet deep on average at the deepest. And so that is what we are left with. Now, if we switch to satellite really quick, we can actually see that the terrain and everything a little differently. So let's go ahead and do that right now. And here we can see that there's kind of lush areas up here which get a lot of rainfall. Remember, this is near the equator, and then the water flows in at Inta, which is what the group of the ethnic people on the north end of the lake is called. It flows in here and it's very muddy. Well, this mud is silt built up from there. This is a man-made canal, clearly, with how straight it is, but all this area on the north end of the lake where it's nice and green and everything, this used to be lake, and it's actually now made up of floating farms, and we'll take a look at that in video closer soon. But on the north end of the lake, the fish look totally different than on the south end of the lake, which is where the marshy region is, where things kind of flow slowly. But even from above, you can see how shallow it is. You can see silt. You can see the plant life as being green on satellite even. So there's lush plants all throughout the lake because of how shallow it is. Now, this used to be a river way, way back. Then it became a lake. And you can see the lake used to extend all the way over here, and during the wet season it still does, but these areas are all on stilts, and you'll see when we get closer that these are mazes of plants and vegetation being grown to harvest, and these are all houses on stilts, and the streets are really navigated by boats, and there's a really specific boat culture that has been associated with this region, as well as these naturally formed islands of just floating reeds and things, is kind of probably where the the people living there got the idea. But the lake has been inhabited for at least 6,000 years, and likely way, way longer than that. So you see there's another city down here, and they're all living on the lake. There's 70,000 people living on this lake. And again, there's a canal that runs down here, but this used to just be a marshy area. So evolutionarily, there are shared fish in these waters as you go down towards the reservoir that you find down here, which is actually bigger. But naturally, this was not here until the 60s. However, they do find some of the fish that are dying out on the more populated part of Lake Inle. They have found a lot of the fish living down here. And the celestial pearl danio was actually found between the two in some swampy areas. So let's take a look now at some footage of the region. Really quickly, I wanted to show you guys some of the fish again before we look at it from above, because these are all some of the nano fish that I laid out. And some of them it's actually hard to get a good image of. Some of these you've already seen in my tank, and others are about to be seen in footage, and then some are probably never going to be seen. Some may be extinct or endangered at this point. But these are some of the nano fish, and I want you to notice something about them. They're all red, or they all have red on them. I just think that's so fascinating, and it could be because carotenoids are very heavy in the lake, and it could be I've spoken with several evolutionary biologists, and Dr. Anthony Mazal has been thinking about it too when I asked him, and he didn't have a good reason off the top of his head or that he knew of pre-existing, but he suggested something that made a lot of sense to me, which is that the whole lake is an average of only 12 feet deep at the deepest, and a lot of it is even shallower than that, like 3 or 4 feet deep, all the way down to a foot deep, where a lot of those floating farms and things are. So it could be that because red and yellows are the first colors that you lose as you go underwater, it could be that these colors really stand out for spawning as well as for warnings or whatever evolutionary reason. It could be that they stand out, and that also they are a sign that the biodiversity in the region, it all kind of trickles down in a food web down to insects and things like that, but they eat plants, and there's a lot in the region that are high in carotenoids, as well as, then the fish eat them, and little fish get eaten by big fish. Well, it concentrates the athelstan and the carotenoids and omega-3 and omega-6s that are needed for that red color. So it's a very rich environment for that, and that's my only thought, as well as the light, that there's something having to do with that probably that led to this. But really, it's a mystery. If you guys have any thoughts or ideas, I'd really love to hear it. Now, also, at the very bottom there, you can see the glass fish in the lake. Those are totally clear fish on the bottom, and we're going to see some of those being caught in just one sec. So let's see that. So here I noticed that we've got some footage. Now, this was listed as India, but every fish they got is endemic out of the water. So I think somebody found some footage and mislabeled it. But here they catch thick-lipped gourami, the glass fish that are endemic there, some danios that are endemic. And I want to give a shout out to the Instagram account here, EJ Aqua Hobby, for showing how the locals were catching fish. They were basically just netting in the shallows, and you can see all those aquatic plants that are immersed growth on the lake there. And if you look closely, they basically just put the net down or throw it over, and then they stomp around and they let the fish come to them. And so it's pretty interesting, but they get some gouramis right off the bat, and then they also get a lot of these glass fish that are very unique to the lake, very cool. And there's other glass fish in the world, of course, but these are some of the species that are right on the lake that had that red tail. Very, very cool looking. Now, also, they go ahead and they go to an aquarium under their own care, and you can see that they've got some of the barbs and that beautiful glass fish there, as well as an Inle loach, and as well as a thick-lipped gourami and some shrimp. So pretty cool what they caught here. But let's show you some footage of the actual river. Now there's the other glass fish in the lake, the second one, and they're just basically taking pictures of it right there next to the lake, and they're going to put them back. So kind of cool. Alright, now this is really shaky footage, so I apologize for that, but you can see some of the gouramis. This is like a GoPro or something under the water, and you can see some of the gouramis, you can see a lot of the plants, lilies, all sorts of really cool stuff there. And this is looking for Chopra danios, specifically on the south end of the lake, which also I want to give a shout out real quick if we scroll down. To Discovery Planet is where I found this footage. So you can see algae is a real factor in the environment, and it allows the fry to hide, and it allows the babies to feed all throughout the lake. So I apologize that shakiness is really rough, but the guy finally finds some danios in the lake, and he finds a good amount of them. So I want to show you guys that real quick. But you can see that the water, even at like 3-4 feet deep, it's super vegetative, really cool. And here we have another view where he finds the Chopra danios, the glow light danios. This also finds the lake Inle, Inle Cyprus Aru Purupure. It's really hard for me to say. Aru Purura. So I can't say it ever right. But in any case, the lake Inle Danio. There's more of those glass fish. That's not the red one, but that's the lala is its species name. And then there's a Parambalala, which is also a really cool name. But again, you can see those are some of the fish that I have in my tank. And they're just in the shallows underneath all the gardens that you find in the lake on the south end, that town area that I showed you on the map. So really cool to see, and there's a lot of them in the water, and this is how a lot of the fish are. Now the CPDs and some of the other fish get kind of harder to find as time goes on. It's gotten harder. They've been harvested, and also pollution is playing a role. But here he's also looking down in the substrate. You can see there's sandy. And what's really cool about the lake is that it is a contradiction, with limestone as the base, which erodes, and then all that plant debris and life, which turns into nitrifying space for so that it's very clean water, but also it turns into nitric acid, carbonic acid, and humic acid, and it turns into a very acidic environment. And here you can see these boats are world famous. So now we're going to kind of talk about the culture of just a little bit, and also some other trivial tidbits if you're still interested. If not, this kind of the end of the fishy part. So thanks for joining us. But this footage is thanks to there's a channel called Tom Trips on YouTube that had this, and beautiful drone footage and boat footage just going through the villages, and you can kind of see how people live there, and you'll see the trademark of Lake Inle culturally. There's the women with the gold hoops around their neck, the Inta people, and then there is also which sometimes get called the giraffe women. But then there's also the famous way that they row their boats with a pole wrapped around their ankle. You see that there a little bit, and they use that as a stick to push off the bottom, kind of like in Venice. It's sort of the same as the gondolier riders. Now here you can see how much the people live off of those immersed regions. And here's the dry season, and sometimes they're almost all the way on land, and other times they're not. But the region is also known for gold as well as rubies and sapphires coming in on that Thai border. Now here's a woman with those neck hoops, and they get more of them every year or two as kind of a ceremony of aging and wisdom. Now they also use the beautiful looking lilies and lotuses, and one of the lotuses they use to spin silk, and it's finer silk than even caterpillar or silkworm silk, and it takes months to make one little scarf or shawl, and they make all sorts of handicrafts. It's become quite the tourist area at the lake, which is a big change of pace because historically this region was a little hard to access. During the British colonial era, it was semi-easy to access, and here we're probably on the northern part of the lake there, and here is the southern part of the lake headed out through the drainage. But again, the people are making a living, like farming every little bit of the lake, floating, like hydroponic, basically, gardens. And so a lot of the map that looks like land is actually shallow water, and all those fish live in there. So in some ways, the fish have gotten more territory to spawn and breed. In other ways, the pollution from boats now using engines and tourists and plastic and things in the environment has caused some of the fish to become threatened. But either way, it's just an incredibly beautiful environment and really cool to see. See, there is that zigzag garden from another angle. And you can see the mountains rise another 3,000 feet or another 1,000 meters up from the lake. So here is the famous traditional fishing, which is now really done for tourists more so. But this is how they throw a net while they use their foot to steer, and they've been known for that for a long time. So again, just a beautiful lake, and it stays around 74 degrees Fahrenheit, 26 degrees Celsius all year round, and is full of vegetation. There's a wet season and a dry season. The north end is on limestone and very silty, which ends up washing down from the hills, and it ends up being a pH of 9. And the southern end is really boggy and marshy, and you get that almost black water in the very far south, and you get crystal clear water in between these regions, unless there's pollution from humans dumping food scraps and things like that. But in a lot of places, the fish will actually eat that, especially as they gut other fish or toss out edible waste. Now, all along this region, there's lots of beautiful Buddhist monasteries and temples as well, and really cool architecture. So I highly advise going there, checking it out, if you ever get the chance. Right now, the government is in a civil war, unfortunately. The army has kind of had a coup, and this region, the Shan region and the Wa region up in the mountains, like I was saying, so the region has been pretty fraught with issues because of the rebellion that the government basically, which it's really just a few lines of mountains and then some jungle, and then the major population centers of the country are all along this river valley here, and Mandalay is not that far away up here, with that being a large city with all sorts of big structures and millions of people. Now, if you go to the east, you end up heading towards Thailand, and this whole region here is Shan, and just below that's the Wa region, WA. And in this area, traditionally, it's been called the Golden Triangle, this region right in here. And that's because there are tribal groups, not primitive tribes, but pretty remote tribes on the Chinese border that have been fueled by the Chinese or the Americans or the British to either stay communist or turn democratic or be dictators, or they've been kind of pawns in different world affairs, from Russia to China to the US to the British to the French. in the region for the last 150 years, and specifically during the Vietnam War, which included the region not too far off. Over here is Vietnam. So they were being pressured to basically pick a side, and in this area they decided to stay autonomous for the most part, and they basically took guns from anybody who would give them to them, and then kind of kept things the way they wanted to. And so this area was known for producing huge amounts of opiates, as well as other illegal substances, and basically supplying a lot of the world for a long time. Now that's shifted to Afghanistan more predominantly now, but for a really long time, this region of Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos was the region known for that. And so, understandably, where it's a death penalty in some of these Southeast Asian countries for possession, they had all-out militias and militaries protecting millions and millions of dollars worth of crops. Now that still exists somewhat, but also we just see breakaway groups that have kept control, and really the government treats this region, the Shan region here, which you can see is not developed at all, they treat it as a breakaway region that's semi-autonomous. So it's an interesting region. It's very dangerous if you get off the beaten path and don't know the right people or have a good guide for Westerners, but very, very interesting, and it all adds to the amazing allure of Lake Inle. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you like these in-depth journeys that we take studying something, please subscribe. We're gonna keep doing it. I love studying the world and looking at biotopes around the world, from the marshy side to the grassy, reedy area underneath a lot of the planted region, to the open water with tons of plants at the bottom, with a little bit of sand and a little bit of soil. All very cool. I know this has been a long one, but if you enjoyed it, a thumbs up really helps things go a long way. And if you want more access to things like that fish information sheet with all the species that I put together, and other extras, as well as 4 extra episodes a week of up-to-date academic info on anything going on in the hobby or freshwater fish, become a member for only $1.99. That's my sales pitch, and now I'm gonna end it. So thanks for hanging tight till the end. I'll talk to you next time. Bye, guys.